The problem is the identification with a mind-based intellectual concept of who you are. We actually create an image of ourselves in our own mind, and then we live from that image, and therein lies the problem. Hey there, this is Mark, and I'm just out and about in my van here, so I haven't felt really inspired to do any videos for a little while here, but I saw a question on Facebook this morning. Someone was asking, what is spiritual growth? And it prompted me to make a reply, and the reply got quite popular, so I thought I'd do a video on that subject. I'm not sure I'm going to say anything different from what I wrote, but sometimes verbally it comes out better. So typically you hear this word all the time, like spiritual growth, and the poster said, well, how can a spirit grow? Spirit's not growing, spirit, and it's actually a really good point. I agreed with him, and yes, the spirit doesn't grow. There is no spiritual growth. It's really usually when people are talking about spiritual growth, it rarely is any growth. What it usually is they usually find themselves a bunch of new quote-unquote spiritual activities to give themselves a sense of achievement, or a sense of getting somewhere, a sense of movement towards something, when really it's more human activity, and it's just clothed in different packages. So people take up yoga and they start doing yoga and they call it a spiritual activity, and they're doing their spiritual stuff. And you know, I'm not picking on yoga, there's nothing wrong with yoga, I'm sure yoga's good for your body. But what happens is people start to identify with the activity, as if doing the activity and identifying with it is what gives you spirituality. What that's given you is just another identity to identify with and live by. Therefore you're further away from true spirituality. You're not anywhere closer to what true spirituality is. It's a human activity once again, and it's something that gives you the illusion of having something when all you really have is an idea of something, an activity. I see the same thing happening. You know, there's a lot of, obviously I talk more about Christianity because I have a lot more experience with that, but I see people in the New Age movement, and I do listen to some of those people because I find that they have very interesting insights. And you know, it's like, there's truth everywhere. I don't necessarily agree with their stance on things like Jesus and so on and so forth, but I listen to people in the New Age movement and I see the same mistake happening as I do in the Christian religion. I see, what I see is the same old thing going on. It's the same old disease of mankind. What they do is they do all sorts of rituals and activities, and they step into and they wear and they clothe themselves in a sense in the activities. So it's really taken up your identity from what you mentally define yourself to be. So if you're into crystals or whatever it might be, I'm not picking on anything, but if you're into, say, crystals, and you're into whatever it might be, what typically happens is people identify with that. They start to dress kind of like a New Age person. They dress in, you know, very colorful clothes and all that sort of stuff, and it's really like an identity that they start to live from, as opposed to actually finding what true spirituality is. And in fact, I'll come back to this at the end of the video or soon, but really reaching spirituality is really the unpackaging. It's the unpackaging of all these identities. It's the removing of all these identities. It's the taking away of identifying with all these different ideas. It's really, you know, the Bible says it really well. It says that the carnal mind cannot see God. Okay, that's how, as obviously written in biblical language. I could translate it, and that is the mind focused on itself as its own source and guide as to who it is cannot experience the true one spirit, creative spirit, also known as God. And this is therein lies the problem. So speaking about it more as in a spiritual quote unquote spiritual way, this is what happens is you can take a person and they can say, okay, I'm a Christian, and they start to go to church and they start to do Christian things. They start to read the Bible and they start to speak like a Christian. And, you know, there's a term known as Christianese, which is kind of a joking term. But the problem with all that is that what they do is they say, okay, I'm a Christian, and they take their identity from being a Christian. And then what tends to happen is then they believe that because everything's happening only in their mind is who they are, their concept that they build in their own intellect of who they are as a Christian is who they are, and that gets tangled up with learning doctrine. So they learn doctrines of a church, they learn things from the Bible, but they learn the knowledge of good and evil. And even in the Bible, the fall of man, the fall of Adam, was out of a higher level of consciousness where he walked with God. The problem is, I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of it all, it's really... And he fell into a level of consciousness where he shall be as God to himself, knowing good from evil. Therefore, what that really means is living from his own idea of what good and evil is. Living from his own intellectual concept of good. So basically, a person becomes a Christian, they believe themselves to be good. They believe, or they can do it the other way. They believe themselves to be, you know, dirty rags, and they can go down the kind of legalist Calvinist route. So it's really all this. The problem is, I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of it all. It's really, the problem is the identification with a mind-based intellectual concept of who you are. We actually create an image of ourselves in our own mind, and then we live from that image, and therein lies the problem. And this is why when you speak to Christians who are living that way, they become very judgmental and nasty towards you if there's a disagreement on, you know, what something means and how the Bible is interpreted and doctrine. These people will literally tell you you're going to hell. They'll tell you you're a deceiver. They'll tell you that you're a false prophet. And the reason they do that, the reason they get into that mindset, is because what they're literally doing is they've literally created God in their own intellectual image. Okay? Remember, it says in the Bible itself, it said that Adam fell into the knowledge of good and evil, knowing themselves as gods. Now, this is what people do with knowledge. There's nothing wrong with knowledge. I've said this before. But when people live from knowledge as their identity, that's when the problem starts. There's nothing wrong with being highly intelligent. There's nothing wrong with having knowledge as a tool to use in your life. But what happens with, typically, I mean, I just know about Christians. I'm sure it happens in all other religions, and I've seen it happening in the New Age movement as well, because I have some experience with those people. But this is what I see happening with Christians, is they become a Christian, they wear the Christian identity, then they learn the doctrine, they learn the Bible, and they identify with what they've learned. Then when you say to them an alternative view, they take that very personally, because they've really created God in their own image. Okay? It says in the Bible that God created man in his image, and God is spirit. Think about this for a moment. God is spirit, God is love, and man was created in God's image. Man fell out of the image of God into the image of man. Man basically has his image from his own intellectual, mental idea of who he is. He lives from that concept. It's conceptualized living. Okay? Man creates God in his own image. Man creates God in his own image. But what that really means is because man is creating the whole thing in his own brain, he is God unto himself. He is actually creating a God of his own brain, and then when you question them on their doctrine, or you question them on what they believe, and you make them doubt it, they become very nasty, angry, and judgmental, because what's happening there is you're challenging God in their mind. They project God outside. They think God's outside, and they think God is the way they believe God to be, but the belief in the way they believe God is supposed to be is all conjured up in their own mind. It only exists in their mind. So really what they don't realize is they have this complete delusion that God's out there and God is this way and the Bible says he's this way, and they have all this knowledge and they live from that. When you actually start to probe that with alternative ideas, they become very angry, and they tell you that you're going to hell. They'll tell you that you're against God and all these sorts of things. But really what they're saying, they don't realize this, of course, is you're really going against the God they created in their own image. And they live from that God as if the God exists outside them, but it doesn't. It exists only inside them. So spiritual growth, therefore, I haven't told you what it is yet. What is spiritual growth? Spiritual growth is the unpacking of all this living from an identity. So really, spiritual growth comes from a growth of consciousness. Okay, as you grow in consciousness and awareness, you let go of this identification with things, places, BMWs, money, religion, Christianity, New Age, crystals, yoga, anything. You give up identifying with those things to give. See, we identify with things to give us identity. We identify with it to give us identity. When we give that up, when the cloud, the fog gets brushed away, what's left is the spirit. So spiritual growth is a growth not into activity, but it's a growth away from identifying with activity, identifying with systems, identifying with belief. So spiritual growth truly is a letting go of living from your own mental constructs and concepts. So that's what spiritual growth is. Okay, that's it. Thank you. See you in another video. This is Mark signing out. Oh, don't forget to subscribe, hit the little bell icon and like, and please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Please share it on Facebook, wherever you go, Twitter and all the rest of it. Thanks a lot. Bye.